A fisherman named Ebuka was running his net through the water. The sun had just begun to set over the wide expanse of the Lagos Lagoon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. Ebuka heaved a sigh as he adjusted his net. It was another day without a proper catch. The day had been long, and his haul had been modest at best. He rubbed his rough, calloused hands together and steadied himself in his fishing boat. Suddenly, the water seemed to ripple strangely. Ebuka's heart raced in shock as his net caught on something unusually heavy. He began pulling the net with all his strength, but it was far heavier than he had anticipated. "What in God's name?" he muttered, gripping the net tighter. With a grunt, he hauled the net onto the deck of his boat. His eyes widened in disbelief. Tangled in the thick fishing net lay a young woman. Her long, dark hair clung to her face and shoulders, wet and shimmering like obsidian. Her dress, a delicate fabric, now soaked and torn, clung to her body. Ebuka stepped back in fear initially, but then moved closer, his heart pounding like a drum. Dropping to his knees beside her, he gently brushed her hair away from her face. "Hey, hey," he called, his voice thick with concern. He leaned in closer, pressing his ear to her lips, and was relieved to hear the faint sound of breath. Quickly, he freed her from the net and began administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. After a tense moment, she coughed violently, regurgitating water from her lungs. Though she regained consciousness briefly, she immediately fell asleep, not uttering a single word. Without wasting another moment, Ebuka covered her with his only blanket and began rowing swiftly back to shore. The night air was unforgiving, and he knew she needed warmth and care. When he arrived at his village, he rushed to the herbalist's home. The elderly man hesitated, looking at the woman with unease. "Young man, what have you gotten yourself into?" the herbalist asked gravely. "Quickly, return whatever creature that is back to the water you took her from." But Ebuka refused to listen. For days, the woman lay in his small oceanside home, drifting between unconsciousness and fitful sleep. Ebuka tended to her tirelessly, feeding her spoonfuls of warm soup when she could manage it, whispering words of encouragement and praying for her recovery. His heart ached with worry for the mysterious beauty who had entered his life like a message from the depths of the sea. Finally, one morning, her eyes fluttered open. Ebuka, who had been quietly mending his fishing nets nearby, dropped everything and rushed to her side. "You're awake," he exclaimed, his relief palpable. She stared at him, confusion clouding her gaze. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice shaky and trembling. "Where am I? Please, stay away from me." Ebuka smiled gently. "I'm Ebuka," he said softly, "a fisherman. My net caught you in the water, barely breathing. Do you remember anything? Your name? What happened to you?" She struggled to recall, but her mind was a blank canvas. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head as they spilled over, pouring down like rain. I don't remember anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Not even my own name." Ebuka's heart broke for her. He had hoped she would wake up with answers, but instead she was left adrift in a sea of amnesia. "It's okay," he reassured her, his voice steady. "You're safe now. We'll figure this out together." For months, the woman, whom Ebuka began calling Adana, meaning father's daughter, stayed in the small fishing village with him. Initially, the villagers were skeptical and afraid of her. However, as the days passed, she began to win their hearts with her smile and gentle nature. She played with the village children, helped the older women, and accompanied Ebuka on his fishing trips. It came as no surprise when love blossomed between the two. Though her amnesia persisted, Adana didn't let it weigh her down. Her life in the fishing village was a world apart from the chaos and privilege she had known before, though she could not yet remember it. Adana's childhood had been filled with warmth and love, the kind only her mother, Amara, could provide. Amara was a radiant woman, known throughout Lagos not just for her beauty, but for her grace and unyielding kindness. She always made time for everyone, from high society events to the villagers who sought her help. Yet, her most cherished moments were those spent with Adana, whether baking cookies in the vast kitchen of their estate or reading stories under the grand willow tree in their garden. Amara's musical laugh and soothing voice could calm any storm. Adana's best friend, Yabo, had also been a fixture in her life. Adana remembered Yabo from her earliest years, a beautiful woman with striking features, always immaculately dressed. Yabo had a commanding presence, her laughter loud and bold, contrasting with Amara's gentle chuckles. Amara was alive, and Yabo seemed to be a true and loyal friend. She attended all the important family functions, was a shoulder to lean on during hard times, and often doted on Adana, bringing her extravagant gifts and sweets. But beneath the friendly facade, there were small signs that only Adana noticed. Even as a child, she sensed something disingenuous about Yabo. Sometimes, Yabo's smiles wouldn't reach her eyes, and her hugs felt too tight, almost suffocating. Once Adana caught Yabo staring at Amara's jewels with a look that wasn't quite admiration, but something darker. Still, she pushed these feelings aside, thinking she was being paranoid. After all, Yabo was her mother's best friend. Everything changed when Amara fell ill unexpectedly. It had been a bright morning when Amara first complained of sharp chest pains. Adana vividly remembered the panic that filled the house, the way her mother clutched her chest, struggling for breath. Doctors were called, but within hours, Amara's vibrant light was extinguished. The official cause of death was listed as a sudden heart attack, and grief enveloped the Okafor family. Adana, only 10 years old at the time, felt the loss like a physical blow. Her mother's absence left a void so vast, it seemed impossible to fill. In the wake of Amara's death, Mr. Okafor became a shadow of himself. The man who had once been the family's rock was shattered, drowning in his sorrow. It was during this vulnerable moment that Yabo stepped in. At first, she seemed like a savior, bringing meals to the grieving family, helping Mr. Okafor manage his affairs, and caring for Adana with a forced maternal affection. But something felt wrong. The way Yabo slid effortlessly into the role of the new woman of the house made Adana's skin crawl. Soon Yabo and Mr. Okafor married. To the world it seemed like a natural progression, but Adana knew it was something far more sinister. As Adana grew older, she began to see the changes in her household. Yabo played the perfect wife in public, attentive, elegant, and charming. She hosted lavish dinners and fundraisers, earning admiration from society. But behind closed doors, her demeanor shifted. Servants whispered about her cruelty and demanding nature, and Adana saw firsthand the coldness behind Yabo's polished facade. To Mr. Okafor, Yabo remained sweet and demure, always playing the loving wife. But with Adana, there was no pretense. Their relationship became one of silent mutual disdain. Adana had inherited her mother's intuition and strength, and she knew Yabo was dangerous. Determined to uncover the truth, she began to observe Yabo more closely. Her suspicions deepened one evening when she overheard Yabo speaking on the phone. Adana had been passing by the study when Yabo's sharp, venomous voice caught her attention. "Yes, darling," Yabo said. "The old fool won't be around much longer. He's growing weaker by the day. Once he's gone, everything will be ours. No more obstacles. We'll have it all." Adana's heart stopped. She pressed herself against the wall, trembling with rage and fear as she listened. Yabo was conspiring with a secret lover to eliminate Mr. Okafor and claim the family's wealth. Adana's hands shook as she realized the depth of Yabo's treachery. She knew she had to warn her father, but how? Adana also knew how blind her father had become to Yabo's manipulations. His grief had made him vulnerable, and he leaned on Yabo, believing her to be the savior he needed. When Adana confronted him that night, her voice quaking with urgency, Mr. Okafor only sighed and rubbed his temples. "Enough," he said, his voice weary. "I know you don't like Yabo, but she has been nothing but supportive to us. You need to stop this nonsense." Adana felt the sting of betrayal, but refused to give up. If her father wouldn't listen, she would gather proof. With a heavy heart but unwavering resolve, she set up a small, discreet camera in her father's study, a desperate measure, her final attempt to protect the man she loved most. She knew Yabo had played a long and calculated game, but Adana was determined to expose her stepmother's true nature. Weeks passed, and Adana waited, anxiety gnawing at her as Yabo's grip on the household tightened. Then, tragedy struck. Her father suddenly died of a heart attack, eerily similar to her mother's death. Grief and rage consumed Adana, but she knew she couldn't act on emotion alone. She secretly retrieved the camera footage, hoping it would provide the answers she sought. What she saw made her blood run cold. On the screen, Yabo handed Mr. Okafor a glass of wine, her voice soft and affectionate, her expression calm. But her eyes revealed a chilling determination. Moments later, Mr. Okafor began to struggle, his face turning red as he clutched his chest in agony. Yabo stood over him, watching coldly, her expression devoid of remorse as his life slipped away. Adana's hands shook as she replayed the footage, the full extent of Yabo's evil sinking in. Her mother's supposed heart attack had likely been no accident, and now her father had suffered the same cruel fate. The girl, who had once been filled with innocence and warmth, now harbored a burning desire for justice. Adana knew exposing Yabo would be dangerous. With a heavy heart, she hid the footage, vowing to use it when the time was right. The camera footage was her only weapon, a small but powerful piece of evidence that could bring Yabo to her knees. Until that day came, Adana knew she had to tread carefully. One wrong move, and she might become the next victim of Yabo's twisted ambition. With Mr. Okafor's death, Yabo now held the reins of the Okafor fortune. According to his will, however, Adana was the rightful heir to the vast empire, leaving nothing to Yabo. This stipulation infuriated her stepmother, who saw Adana as the only obstacle standing in her way. Yabo began devising a new plan. Into the months following her father's death, Adana felt the walls closing in. Yabo's once subtle manipulations became more overt. Suitors began appearing at the house, men Yabo had carefully selected, men who could be easily controlled. "You must see reason, Adana," Yabo would say, her voice dripping with false concern. "Your father wanted you to secure the family's future. You cannot delay any longer." Adana's refusal only deepened the tension between them. She could sense Yabo's patience wearing thin, and a sense of foreboding settled over her. She knew her stepmother's true nature, knew that behind her smile lay the heart of a cold and ruthless woman who would stop at nothing to achieve her goals. The breaking point came one stormy evening. Adana returned to the study after dinner, drawn by an inexplicable urge to review the hidden footage one last time. As she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her. Turning, she found Yabo standing there, her eyes gleaming with malice. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Yabo's voice was low, almost a hiss. You've been meddling where you don't belong, Adana. And now, just like your parents, you'll regret standing in my way. When Yabo invited Adana on a private yacht cruise, she said, "Let's get away from all this for a while." Adana hesitated, but the thought of another argument with Yabo exhausted her. She agreed, convincing herself that a few hours on the water would be harmless. Before she left, she slipped the memory card containing the damning footage into a small hidden pendant in her room, a simple, elegant heirloom that had belonged to her mother. It was her last safeguard, her secret weapon. The yacht was everything one would expect from a family like the Okafors, sleek, luxurious, and decorated to the nines. The sky was a brilliant blue, the sun sparkling over the water, but an unmistakable tension hung in the air, something Adana couldn't shake. Yabo kept exchanging flirty glances with the captain, her secret lover. As the yacht drifted farther from shore, Yabo's true intentions became clear. A nervous young man and an older priest were ushered onto the deck. Adana's heart began to race. The young man was introduced as Jacob, while the priest held a small book in his trembling hands. "This is Jacob," Yabo said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You will marry him now, Adana. We can't waste any more time." Adana's eyes widened in shock. "Are you out of your mind?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You can't force me to marry a stranger." Yabo's smile fell, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "Enough," she snapped. "You will do as you're told, or you will suffer the consequences. Your father's legacy must be secured, and I won't let you ruin it." Adana's blood boiled. Months of anger and grief erupted as she stepped forward, unafraid. "You think I don't know what you're doing," she spat. "I know you killed my father, just like you killed my mother. You're a monster, and I won't let you control me." Yabo's eyes narrowed dangerously, and for a moment, panic flickered across her face. But just as quickly, it was replaced by something darker. Without warning, she lunged at Adana, grabbing her arms and digging her nails into her skin. The struggle was brief but violent. Adana fought to break free, her heart pounding, but Yabo's grip was unyielding. With a final shove, Yabo pushed Adana backward. Teetering on the edge of the deck, the world tilted, and before she could regain her balance, she fell. The cold, unforgiving sea swallowed her whole. Above, Yabo stared down at the spot where Adana had disappeared. Her face was pale, her breath ragged. The reality of her actions hit her all at once. Turning to the captain, her voice shrill and desperate, she cried, "Drive! Drive! We have to go now." The yacht roared to life and sped away, leaving behind nothing but rippling waves and the shadow of a crime Yabo believed had been erased. That was how Adana had woken up in Ebuka's modest oceanside home, with no recollection of her past. Back in the village, love blossomed effortlessly between Ebuka and Adana. They fell into an easy rhythm, as though their souls had always been destined for one another. Mornings were spent gathering the day's catch, and afternoons helping the villagers. One day, as they walked along the beach with waves lapping at their feet and the sky blushing with the colors of dusk, Ebuka took Adana's hand. His heart raced, though his voice was calm. "Adana," he said, "I know you don't remember your past, but we've made our own memories here. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend my life making more of them with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Adana's eyes, but they were tears of joy. She squeezed his hand and whispered, "Yes, Ebuka. I don't know who I was before, but I know who I am now, and it's because of you." Their wedding was a simple affair, held by the sea that had brought them together. The entire village gathered to celebrate, and the air was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of fresh flowers. Adana wore a dress of soft linen, her hair crowned with delicate white blossoms. Ebuka stood beside her, his smile radiant and his heart full. As they exchanged vows, something deep within Adana stirred. The moment Ebuka slipped the ring onto her finger, a flood of memories came rushing back. Her mother's gentle voice, her stepmother's cold eyes, the confrontation on the yacht, and the push that sent her into the sea. She stumbled backward, but Ebuka caught her, concern darkening his eyes. Adana, what is it?" he asked, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. Adana gripped his hands tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember everything." The crowd fell silent, the joy of the moment giving way to collective uncertainty. Adana held on to Ebuka, drawing strength from the man who had saved her in every way. She took a deep breath and looked up at him, her gaze steady. "You saved me, Ebuka. You saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving." Ebuka's protective instincts flared. He held her close, his voice firm. "We need to act now," he said. "We'll go to the city and stop her before it's too late." Meanwhile, back in the city, rumors of Adana's disappearance had spread like wildfire. Many believed she had drowned. Yabo played the grieving stepmother in public, but in private, she reveled in her newfound power. With the lawyers waiting for Adana and no sign of her return, they began to set a date to transfer the fortune to Yabo. The sun was dipping low in the sky when Adana and Ebuka arrived at the Okafor estate. Yabo was seated at the head of a long mahogany table, a pen in hand, and a smug smile on her lips. That smile vanished when the doors burst open, and Adana stormed in, Ebuka by her side. The room fell silent. Yabo's face turned ghostly pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Adana?" she whispered, her voice cracking. How are you alive?" Adana's voice was clear and strong. "Did you think you could kill me, Yabo? Did you think you could take everything my father built and get away with it?" Yabo's composure crumbled as police officers, alerted by Adana and Ebuka, entered the room. Adana placed the evidence on the table, her hands trembling with anger. "This is proof that you poisoned my father and tried to murder me. You will pay for what you've done." Yabo's protests turned into desperate sobs as the police arrested her. The lawyers, stunned into silence, watched as the woman they had nearly handed the Okafor legacy to was taken away in disgrace. Yabo's accomplice, the yacht captain, confessed to his role and was sentenced to prison. Yabo herself was sentenced to death. Adana was restored as the rightful heir, but the wealth meant little to her now. She turned to Ebuka, the man who had saved her in every way. Together they returned to the simple, beautiful life they had built by the sea, where love, kindness, and the bonds of true family were the greatest treasures of all. Adana invested in the village that had embraced her, ensuring it thrived for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story, please like and share. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and where you're watching from. One lucky subscriber will be rewarded. Winner announced in the next video. Stay connected.